Pokémon Colosseum might single-handedly be the coolest game in the Pokémon franchise. Unfortunately, it's a pretty painful game to actually sit through. Yes, gamers, today we're finally taking a gander at one of the two spin-offs that actually has both the mainline gameplay mechanics, but unlike the Stadium games, an actual single-player main story to play through as if it were a main series game. If that wasn't enough, Colo and its successor would be renowned for the game-breaking decision to primarily focus on double battles as the game's biggest selling point, even featuring brand new gameplay mechanics alongside the typical Stadium modes. Everything sounds absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately though, this is a game that breaks under analysis, which is why we're here today. See both the towering heights and the utter crashing and burning the game can provide. Let's begin. Of course, diving right into the world, we open with a brand new region being Orre, or Orre, being a massive desert with locations sprinkled throughout brimming with personality. Unlike what the mainline games bring us, this world is not one massive interconnected world that you could access entirely through a single trip on foot, but rather the world's areas are separated via a world map accessed by hitting an area's travel load zone. While it's certainly a daring choice to cut out on such an immersive element of the game, we gotta question whether or not the implementation is good. Sadly, it's got some deep cutting issues, as most areas across the world only typically have one exit to the world map. So when you run across town to do a thing, it's always followed by manually needing to walk back. While that's usually the standard, a simple tool to dance around this act like any form of fast travel just doesn't exist, meaning any trips in or out of town are always on foot and to very specific positions, while areas that take time to reach, let's say Pyrite Cave or Deep Colosseum, will be nothing short of a dread to deal with. Considering, of course, you have to do trips to and from the destination. Thankfully, this travel issue is speed related, which means it's able to be offset by good movement tools. It's just a shame the game doesn't have any good movement tech. As far as walking goes, we actually do have a positive change with the movement being taken off of grid-based tiles, now letting you do some Gen 6 plus, but technically 7 plus omnidirectional movements. Of course, this is a buff to movement since you can take more precise inputs and cover more ground faster through the diagonal inputs. Although with one movement benefit, of course there's two negatives. The most noticeable one is simply the game's rancid top speed, as this mild jog is the best your character can do for the entire game, without any form of running shoes or bicycle, meaning every shred of gameplay, both for the plot and more importantly backtracking or other grinding related nonsense, just looks like this. Funnily enough, the slow movement speed isn't our biggest headache, but rather our mostly unnecessary companion. Yeah, for whatever reason, this is not a solo adventure, as early on in the second area of the game, you're graciously gifted the obnoxious companion, which, while it is nice that we have a companion that does speak for your silent protagonist, unlike the mainline games when you actually have escort sections, there is a negative impact here, as this one has the hindrance of being able to body block you if you walk in her direction, either stopping you entirely if a wall's in the way, slowing you down as you try to walk around, or some other instances of slow. The under subway staircase, Egan's house, and the Pokemart serve as the biggest offenders of this movement dread, leaving movement and travel in general to be an anti-fun experience across the board. A big thing that helps set Colo's gameplay apart from the norm is the story progression itself, particularly the lack of HMs entirely as a gatekeeper to the world and plot, meaning everything's a case of talking to the right people and fetching required items without any restrictions on your team's movesets. Obviously a positive, as it keeps your Pokemon's focus on battle without junk cluttering your pool of options being a nice positive. Speaking of junk cluttering your inventory, we've got a quick note on Gen 3's inconsistent bag limits. Just like Ruby and Sapphire specifically, your main back pocket caps at 20 items while still fitting everything the other item types provide into their other categories. If you thought that went nowhere though, gamers, we have a revolutionary change in the items department, hence bringing this up. As now, if you somehow manage to cap your main item pocket, for some reason, bending the fabric of reality itself, items picked up afterwards will be collected and automatically sent to the PC's item storage, absolutely burying the concept of backtracking for items because the game arbitrarily locked you out of grabbing them. The fact it took this long to implement is sin enough, but the fact Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald just decided they didn't want to adopt this change is absolutely despicable and feels malicious. But of course, somehow, in bafflingly stupid changes, our final note for the overworld just, what even, dude? Okay, so saving, get this, can only be performed at a PC. yeah, for some reason, the mandatory feature saving was just ripped out of the menu entirely, meaning now when you want to save, you gotta go find a PC to do so, meaning two things. One being the fact you'll be forced to go out of your way whenever you're done playing to find one of these, potentially adding many seconds or minutes in backtracking or doing more battles just to reach the PC. Or secondly, making resetting the game when catching a Pokemon a backtracking nightmare, since you're starting from a PC. If you're trying to simply catch something normally or do nature resets, shutting the game off to reset a battle, then being forced to walk back to your destination can be time consuming to say the very least. And considering all the battling you need to do to even catch the Pokemon in the first place, combine that with the Pokemon catch rates in question, and yeah, you might just be speedrunning a migraine. That's all for the overworld gameplay. Outside of a really cool setting, omnidirectional movement, HMs not being a thing, and some item storage shenanigans as fantastic positives, there are several deep-cutting negatives eating away at the task of simply walking around. While damaging, these do paint the illusion of travel feeling significantly worse at times than it actually is. Still not the greatest though. In terms of gameplay mechanics, surprisingly, this isn't just Gen 3, but it's always double battles. But brand new gameplay mechanics even find ways to sneak in to only exist on the GameCube, plenty of which don't even maintain their appearance in the sequel. But as for returning Gen 3 knowledge, just keep in mind that these double battles don't work like they do Gen 4 Plus. When a Pokemon's knocked out, a new one must enter battle mid-turn, meaning their entry's not safe and leaves them prone to damage and even fainting the same turn they come out. It's a huge detail to keep in mind over the course of this entire game, being doubles only in the main mode as a form of skill expression to plot out a safe KO where the new entry, a potential threat, isn't even given the chance to give you trouble. Meanwhile, something to keep you on your toes when taking hits. Look dude, 4 KOs in one turn cannot be underestimated. Well, there's your scene for battle. So what's actually new? Well, we gotta address the elephant in the room. The big one that lurks around every battle. Yes, gamers, it's the call button. You thought I was gonna say Shadow Pokemon, didn't you? Rookie mistake. The call command takes the place of the old run command in battle. And for the most part, in Colo, it doesn't do much. As in most instances, it'll do nothing on use. There are 2 exceptions to this rule. If your Pokemon is asleep, you can actually use it to wake them up without the cost of an item, although it will eat their turn. The other exception with calling comes with the introduction of the game's biggest feature, being the game's biggest piece of identity of Shadow Pokemon. Basically, a Shadow Pokemon is a gameplay modifier with many effects attached. Both good, but usually bad. But the first thing to note is the fact that these are the only Pokemon in the game you can physically catch. As while Pokemon just don't exist, your catchable lineup exists through trainer battles and always have to deal with the funnies Shadow Pokemon can bring. So what do these traits entail? For our more immediate effects, they're banned in a certain Colosseum and the entirety of battle mode. They can't be named at first, they can't evolve, they can't gain friendship, nor can they learn new attacks. And EXP is not given to the Pokemon immediately, alongside further traits, including your Pokemon having next to nothing available regarding details by default, locked to only one attack with nature, and the rest of their move pool hidden with EXP gain impossible at first. Thanks to the Shadow Gauge bar tracked in the menu and on the battle screen, you can unlock the previously mentioned details over time as each 20% of the gauge is quelled. Over time, slowly regaining attacks, eventually learning your nature, and getting EXP gain re-enabled. Just not immediately. As for progressing the Shadow Gauge itself, it can go down in several ways, all with modifiers attached depending on the Pokemon's nature. Ways to knock down the gauge include the likes of the cologne items, walking around the overworld, simply just trying to battle with them, and calling them out of hyper mode, which is our next topic. Hyper mode is a special state that a Shadow Pokemon can randomly enter when attacking using their exclusive Shadow move, actively eating their turn in the process. Yes, entering Hyper mode does in fact cause you to lose that Pokemon's action entirely, only being possible to exit through boxing the Pokemon if they faint in most instances, a very rare chance to just leave it on its own, and calling them in battle as just mentioned. Entering it is luck-based with the odds of it happening depending on both the Shadow Gauge's depletion process and once again, the nature. Once that bar turns red though, it's go time. As in this state, your Pokemon's kinda just in an all or nothing mode, as we have a tug of war between positives and negatives that try to hold you back. Complication 1 is the fact that you can't use any healing items on them, meaning in a battle emergency, you've either got to risk staying in, probably in one-shot range, or switching in something else that'll throw off your battle tempo, necessitating the use of a healing machine to keep your hyper mode intact. But as for Complication 2, using any normal attack essentially causes a new pool of traded Pokemon obedience issues, meaning if hyper mode activates, you're essentially just screwed out of messing around with the type chart entirely, since you'll never be able to reliably hit the attack you're trying to use, likely a coverage move. Instead, your command will probably just automatically swap them out, inflict some kind of confusion self hit, or more. So far, there's no real reason to stay in hyper mode once it hits, but that's because there's still an elephant to address: Shadow Rush. This is a special attack that all Shadow Pokemon have that very uniquely just does not engage with the type chart for some beautiful neutral damage with no immunities. Why it matters for hyper mode is just the teeny tiny fact that this move's crit chance, just for no reason, is just bumped up to 90% in hyper mode, just leading to some wicked damage output with one attack that you can reliably use in this mode, giving you a very strong reason to just stay in hyper mode and backtrack to the healing machines when need be in your quest to deplete that gauge, which is an integral task as an empty shadow gauge can lead to purification, freeing your mon of being a shadow Pokemon. Bring whoever has their gauge empty to this very important rock and you'll finally be able to make them normal, freeing them of all the shadow Pokemon quirks entirely. With all of your earned EXP, possible evolution, a fourth attack, and other restrictions all put to bed for an absolute positive goal to work towards. That's pretty much always worth doing unless you're like Sneasel or something. The only real note to mention here is the fact that it is possible to bypass the shadow gauge depletion thanks to a consumable item. Just a shame you only get 3 in the game total. Just ignore the number on screen. But gamers, finally, for the mechanics is of course a quick note on shiny Pokemon. Basically, if you're trying to shiny hunt, just keep in mind that the game's gift encounters are entirely shiny locked, meanwhile shadow Pokemon aren't. But let's be real, with how hellish resets are in this game, you're not going to touch the thought of shiny hunting with a 10-foot pole. Which is funny because that's not even all, since this is ignoring the simple fact that your Pokemon's shininess and stats are determined the first time you battle them, meaning subsequent battles, like later in the story or rematches, are off the table. Not to mention, you actually have to catch the Pokemon first before you're able to see whether or not it's actually shiny, because seeing the enemy with it doesn't do you any good. Like seriously, this system is just a mess. Although mechanically speaking, I believe we've covered all the new and relevant gameplay mechanics Pokémon Colosseum brings to the table. It's basically just shadow Pokemon and a button that makes purifying them easier. Really just being 2 well-contained features that unfortunately only really hurt you by giving you a slower start to using new Pokemon, which if improperly implemented could come with its own heap of problems. Okay, finally we get to the single most scuffed section in Pokémon Colosseum, being the playthrough. Unfortunately, this game takes some of the biggest hits in the entire series as far as replayability factors are concerned. To see that in action, look no further than the Pokemon lineup. Due to all the complications with all the game's Pokemon existing in a finite supply of 1 each, alongside the total lack of wild Pokemon, your supply of options are utterly pitiful. For our main game run specifically, we have the 3 normal Pokemon the game will give you for free, 2 of which you start with, alongside the 44 shadow Pokemon available prior to the credits, several of which suffer from how horribly late game they are. For instance, the game's final gauntlet has 6 shadow Pokemon you aren't even given a chance to purify assuming you win all the battles, much less even have a chance to have in your party to use, since they're obviously sent off to the PC automatically unless you've got empty team slots, right? Add them alongside other deeply late pickups, and congrats, you have a list of mons that you basically don't have a chance to use without going excessively out of your way to make it happen. Mind you, a lot of the Pokemon you get in this game aren't necessarily known for their power. Once we combine these 2 pools of catchables together, we've got 47 different Pokemon to use during the main story, obviously adding an extra 11 for evolutions. Although once we add the post game, we get 4 more shadow Pokemon alongside 1 free pickup of a mon, only accessible from the game's battle mode, for a grand total of 52 total catchable mons in the game, period. Well, technically it's 63 after evolutions, since all the game's Pokemon are, again, limited to a hard cap of 1. With everything on the table, you can only have 52 unique Pokemon on your game before some weird bonus disc or e-reader stuff, which is worth noting because we won't be covering those at all. These limits on the catchable pool leave you with exactly this many Pokemon for your boxes, which comes with a funny consequence of just leaving you with 3 total PC boxes, since obviously you won't be needing more. Of course though, these limitations do beg a question. How good is the game's type variety? Better question, how abysmal is the game's type variety? Well, assuming we keep our math of a well-fed type at 5 total options for the main story, out of the game's 17 types, only 4 meet that baseline. Yeah, water and dirt both have 6. Normal reaches 7, meanwhile flying somehow managed to hit double digits at 11, which would be fine if this game had a need for them with fast travel. Of course it doesn't. Meanwhile, 12 of the other types are all swimming around in the sewage of 2, 3, or 4 options for your main game use, killing any sense of creative team building or variety for what's obviously the worst Pokedex in Pokemon history. But of course, gamers, one type just had to outstink them all. And of course, it's the ghost typing, bringing only a single pathetic option to the table, being one of the earliest shadow Pokemon you can catch. Just what is wrong with this game, man? Well, that covers the catchables. We are actually neglecting the battleable lineup, which when mandatory trainers, optional trainers, random rematches, Mount Battle, and Colosseums all line up, it'll land us somewhere around 200 Pokemon to battle. Obviously, with more once you jump to the battle mode. Also, while it is a minor note, it's still worth mentioning the starter Pokemon situation. Unlike previous titles where you have a choice in what you get, here you're just given 2 Pokemon to start the journey with, lacking a choice entirely. While obviously hindering replayability because it's the same start every time, the game's second snag with the Johto starters at least help make up for this lack of player choice through adding the same choice, but later, just being complicated for no reason. While that covers the Pokemon you'll have in battle, getting a team properly armed to lay waste to the game is a bit tough. Trading, for instance, is entirely locked to the post-game, so if you wanted something from outside the game's catchables, not only does it have to wait until after the credits, but it may also need to deal with Fire Red and Leaf Green's obnoxious trade restrictions too, should those be the game you choose to use. The move reminder being a great feature that frequently was used to get back old attacks or accessing new ones sometimes, just doesn't exist at all in the game, hindering late game pickups quite a bit, but those aren't enough apparently. So the devs made sure you couldn't even obtain all the TMs in the game. Yeah, out of the 50 TMs, not only are 12 of them entirely inaccessible without trading, more worrying is the fact that all 8 HMs are absent too. While obviously punching holes in the movesets of all Pokemon is bad, the types of water, normal, flying, and ground get it rough when they lose access to some very valuable stab moves, with replacements just being few and far between. Since of course we're working with Gen 3 level up movesets. They're notoriously pretty bad from how long it takes to get new moves. So with all of this considered, it's not difficult to label Colosseum as nothing short of a team building headache and then some. But unfortunately, things aren't looking up as we pivot towards the level curve. For a series first though, we actually have an entry point that's not level 5, but all the way up at the 25s range. Yes, this is where we start the game, and this is where the level curve begins. Clearing the first 2 areas in the game, thanks to its very limited number of trainers, will guarantee you about 1 level before you're off to Pyrite Town. Once here though, throughout the Colosseum, the building, and the cave, you're pitted against an avalanche of low 30s trainers, even touching high 20s in some areas, where now you're starting to rock your team with shadow Pokemon that can't level up at all, while your regular Pokemon are struggling to keep their heads up, only really helped out by the Mirror B fight, our first proper boss just being under-leveled specifically. Surely a balancing decision. A Gate Village will follow after throwing more mid-30s at you, with a high 30 at the end just being the perfect introduction for what Mount Battle has with levels that pretty much just match the previous area, even holding true with your battle against Dakim, only capping at 40. So far, things aren't half bad. Early game had you falling behind a bit due to how little XP your normal mons were getting, with shadow Pokemon quite literally getting nothing, physically unable to keep up with the level curve. Once Purification enters the table though, leveling is still fine, going up with natural difficulty coming from more competent teams. Now this is the part where I tell you that this all assumes that you're using a team of 2 Pokemon to squeeze out as much levels as possible. Yes, with only 2 Pokemon, you're barely on par with what's going on in Mount Battle. Throughout Pyrite Town, you're struggling, falling behind even, and now you start to realize, oh wait, this isn't great because you're going to use more Pokemon. And you know what that means? Your EXP is gonna get spread far too thin. So guess what? Now you get to fall behind. But sure, 2 Pokemon. You just hit level 40, and Mount battle's now finished, meaning it's time to go to the Under, with exactly 0 mandatory trainers between the Dakim and Venus battles. Yes, both Dawn Fangirl and the back-to-back Cypher peons are optional. We'll see what'll go down as one of the most egregious level jumps in the entire game. Again, high 30s, rounded out by a 40 to be immediately met with spams of 45s. Just because, again, with our team of 2, you're just hitting 40, potentially not even. Like, this just doesn't work. It's like the game just expects you to roll into Pyrite Town, magically know that some imposter is in Mirabie's den, that you absolutely must do the fight so you can hear the funny music. So you do. You just repeat loads of content again, because these trainers that you already battled are now rematches if you walk past them. Yes, their vision is actually restored. Mind you, we're going 2 areas completely out of the way before you walk back and go to the Under. Where now here, you're supposed to magically know which NPCs are trainers before taking on the Colosseum, all before this battle. But gamers, this is just an idealized version of what the EXP fetching is supposed to look like. Why is that so? Well, you can't even do the Colosseum until after Venus is beaten, for instance. But sure, man, whatever. Somehow you managed to win the fight, and now are bombarded with highest 30s and low 40s, rolling into the Shadow Pokemon Lab for what's more the same. So these sections are fine sometimes. And after the previous boss fight, you'd think Ein would have some crazy level jump, but no. You see 46, 7, 8. It builds off Venus nicely. Just after loads of battles in the subway and lab, just makes more reasonable to be able to match him. Hell, your team of 2 could actually match him on or 2, which hopefully shows how unreasonable Venus's level spike was. Like, holy hell, dude. But whatever. That leads us into the final area, going to Realgam Tower. The generic trainers just dropped the ball here quite a bit, as ignoring the final gauntlet trainers, the ones in the main area are low 40s, just like back in the lab, hoping a shadow Pokemon helps make up the difference. The real appeal to this area is just the many boss trainers lying around. Mirabie's rematch with levels ranging from 44 to 46, Dakim with 45 to 47, Venus with 47 to 48, and Ein with 48 to 50. While it doesn't seem the worst, this section does end up being a little bit messy, courtesy of the freedom of choice you're actually granted during it, since you can actually pick the order in which you battle these boss trainers again. Not to mention the random regular trainers you'll have to fight between certain fights. But the level increase itself is fine, assuming you go through the numerical order. But of course, gamers, we're not allowed to have fun. 2 generic trainers later, and now you've got Gonzap knocking on your door, with yet another glaring level jump, as Team 2 might just be short of level 50 at this point, so the 52s and 3s thrown at you might just feel a bit suffocating. Also, ignore the level 47 Skarmory, please. You're not allowed to have decently leveled Pokemon anymore. The level curve is taking off without you, especially as it's now time for the endgame, where you're fighting high level 40s generic trainers that refuse to even touch 50 before our next boss fight, which, gamers, because it's a boss, needs to have a level jump of 6 to 8, being an average of 55, which, no, the singular level up you might have gotten since Gonzap will not help you. But gamers, this isn't even the final boss, because of course there's one last fight, which to the shock of nobody, because it's a boss, it apparently needs yet another level jump of 4 to 7 levels. Like, these guys are breaching the 60s. Meanwhile, your minimum team count physically can't. Hell, even matching the Tyranitar is too much for some reason. But again, all of this hopium is built off a 2-mon team that fails in several places to keep up with the level curve. If you thought you were going to pull this off with a 6-man squad, you've genuinely lost your damn mind. If the mainline games can't pull that off, there's no hope for the doubles only game. Whatever, I guess we could talk about the post game. It's mostly just cram-packed with generics using Pokemon in the 50s plus, even reaching 60s by Deep Colosseum. Mainly interrupted by boss trainers, typically 6 to 10 plus levels ahead. Capped completely at 70, surprisingly not the final foe you fight. Which, good luck reaching. You're gonna need it. So cool, leveling sucks. What about the level grinding methods in this game? Oh, they're also scuffed. Great. Thanks to the way that standard trainer rematches are limited, and again, a total lack of wild encounters, grinding will typically take a jog in 2 different directions if we want to ignore optional trainers, which please fight them, I'm begging you. You'd typically expect Colosseums to be the go-to grinding answer, but weirdly enough, they're not. As across the main story, you've got 3 of these to potentially grind. You'd expect Pyrite Colosseum to be the best option, considering you're forced to run it during the main game, but an avalanche of mons 50 plus aren't making the grind reasonable by any stretch, especially if you want to do it as early as possible. 40s plus will make up Phoenix Colosseum's lineup, absolutely tarnished by the unevolved junk trying their damnedest to not give you XP. And then there's the Under Colosseum, hanging around 55s plus, rivaling that of the last two trainers in the game. Honestly, the biggest problem here is just the fact the game doesn't even tell you these level jumps in advance. You'll just walk into the slaughterhouse unexpectedly, set up for failure, unless you look it up in advance, wasting lots of time on inconsistent EXP gain, probably just hoping to white out. Meanwhile, our other grinding method of Mount Battle just serves as a much more consistent means to fetch EXP, as this 100 battle gauntlet is cram-packed with trainers, where your main story run had you pitted up against upper 30s in this area. Weirdly enough, when you begin the run of this place as a feature, you will battle foes scaling in levels, starting among the level 15 range, only catching up to the main game levels, again, where you were in the main story when you were here before, around 40 battles in to start properly grinding. Thankfully, a bit easy to return to on repeat runs, with the area's deepest battles capping at level 60, meaning it's not exactly impossible to conquer this challenge before even going to the final boss, if you're after a final grinding session of some kind. Although now that we've got these two paths painted, grinding is going to be weird. As for when you'll want to grind, with Mirror B's difficulty spike in air quotes, Phoenix Colosseum's not really gonna help, again, levels, although you could actually try it when you want to fight Dakim, but the EXP gains will make it immediately not worthwhile. For Venus, you'll absolutely want to run Mount Battle, but the first stretch of 30 battles will certainly be sitting in the way of the foes that you would want to milk for the XP in the first place. Meanwhile, by the time you're looking at that real game tower grind, you may as well just finish Mount Battle since it's absolutely your best option at this point, unless Under Colosseum's faster pace just sounds more appealing. Ultimately, what'll end up making the grinding aspect the most frustrating part of the game though, is just how unnecessary the level jumps actually are. Because unlike the mainline games, the boss teams aren't sabotaged by some mandatory monotyped nonsense that we have to sit here and break down for no reason because they can't keep their own trends intact. No, here it can just be whatever, meaning the boss fights are typically working with much more competent teams. Makes for battles that's just much harder to cover every option in. Yes, even the one that's absolutely cram-packed with the same mon 4 times. Especially as Colosseum uniquely plays around with pseudo-randomized enemy leads. Yeah, in battle, most team slots have the chance to be the lead you fight in battle, meaning you can't actually rely on the hardest foes using the same lead of 2 Pokemon every time, adding a new layer of unpredictability that never existed before. So understand, the final boss already has an absolutely brutal team to handle. So when the leads aren't limited to 2 set-in-stone foes, your path to victory might be closed just as early as turn 1 if something goes wrong. Maybe you want to see the frame 1 Scizor to remove it as fast as possible. Maybe you want Machamp and Slowking out first, so Slowking gets shipped down by Machamp's Earthquakes for you. Or maybe you're just staring down the Slowking slacking skill swap lead that could just be lights out should you have no way to interrupt it fast enough. This chaos here is beautiful, being a massive shame as it never returns again in a future title. But when the game has more freedom through type diversity on boss teams, the random leads, everything being a double battle, your box's overall power level being much lower due to the mon selection, not the overall number, but the actual quality of said Pokemon, the game is inherently more difficult on average. And not through means like IVs, EVs, and whatnot, just what you have. Which is why the level jumps in the main game are so dreadful. The enemy teams are already good enough. So my question is, why do we need this unnecessary stat inflation that'll simply lead to more grinding to offset these stats, when you probably already needed to grind more levels? Pushing the goalposts further for the hell of it. It's just asinine. Although for difficulty, we've got a very odd detail with Shadow Pokemon that has the potential to make or break fights, as battles with recurring foes will have one of 2 teams, being a single swapped mon. Which one you fight will actually depend on whether or not you snag the Shadowmon on the first fight, creating interesting dilemmas where snagging mons sooner or later could have a small but interesting payoff in making battles potentially easier or harder for you. For Mirror B, it's pretty much always optimal to just kill the Sudowoodo though, on the first or even the second time you fight it, since the Armaldo is much harder to remove. Meanwhile, finishing the Evice battle may be tricky. For instance, being able to steal his Tyranitar could allow you to win the fight significantly easier. Although if you manage to lose the fight, the replacement Aggron could be a hole you cannot patch up, and of course you don't have a Master Ball to instantly KO it. Meanwhile, our last example, with Gonzap's post-game team, will be significantly less frightening if he still has the Skarmory. Lastly, for the playthrough section, we've got to make a quick note on backtracking, which the game flubs on pretty hard, and the counting we're about to do will really put it in perspective. When we've got both the to and from the outskirts stand for Pokeballs, both the in and out of Pyrite Town for the Cog, the very short trip back to Egan's house before going to the Relic Forest, the return to Egan's house after Mount Battle, the run back to Pyrite Town Prison before the Under, the comically long run back from the Under subway to visit the Shadow Pokemon Lab, the trip all the way back to the Under after the lab, and finally after delivering the data ROM, leaving the Under for the end game, unless you want to add an extra number for the optional Master Ball pickup that you're probably gonna want to get. Add them all up, and it gives us a total of 10 mandatory backtracking trips, which for Pokemon standards, it would be considered above average, and for the RPG genre as a whole, it's realistically not that many. Unfortunately, the backtracking in this game is just much more in your face from how insulting it can be sometimes. Right, obviously it's not that bad in some areas since you can just read the text, but magically knowing to return to a gate village without guidance after Mount Battle isn't exactly made clear until you're already in the town to learn where you need to go absolutely serves the biggest L here. Meanwhile, a larger L in terms of navigation in general is just right before the end game, since there's just no dialogue given to point you in that direction, since you deliver the data ROM and now magically the construction site gets renamed on the travel screen. Yeah, hopefully you have good eyesight because you might miss it. Regardless, that's all for the replayability factors, being an absolute mess that comes up short in damn near all measurable metrics. From a pitiful Pokemon variety, very limited ways to get out a Pokemon, a very bumpy level curve with excessive level jumps, mediocre grinding methods, and of course painful backtracking in a game without proper fast travel, things are not good. Thankfully though, it's not all negatives, since the game does luck out, courtesy of its above average difficulty, again to focus on double battles, alongside the random leads that might throw a wrench in your planning, will all end up in aiding in a counterattack against the many shortcomings the playthrough is plagued with. In terms of side features, Colosseum is a surprisingly straightforward game, all things considered, with very little on the beaten path to offer. First off in that list, we don't even have proper battle content, as we've got the PDA. This is basically just a menu packed with very valuable threads to explore. The most relevant being the snag list, just tracking all the game's shadow Pokemon and whether or not they're caught or purified. Outside of 100% completion though, the typical one-time nature of some story battles with shadow Pokemon just leaves this tracker's use low in demand. Hey, it could be worse though. The strategy memo is also here and useless, made much worse through being an optional unlock, essentially just being a diet version of the Pokédex from the mainline games. Lastly, found here we have the email box, basically just being dialogue delivered to you without needing to find certain people to progress the game's plot. Accessible whenever, being able to be reread again, which for the most part is basically useless. Yeah, this menu's unfortunately a bit of a waste of time, unlike the next feature with the Pokemon Daycare. As always, being the feature that lets you deposit a Pokemon in order to grind up EXP via your overworld movement. Why it's getting mentioned is for two reasons. The first one just being the one Pokemon limit. It just means breeding's not in the game at all, while also limiting how many Pokemon can farm EXP at a time. But the second trait comes to Shadow Pokemon specifically, as instead of earning EXP per step, they will actually have their Shadow gauge chipped down instead, not only serving as another means to make progress on purification, but it's a hands-off one at that, completely removed from your party. But whatever. What y'all want to see is the battle-related stuff, so let's just hop right into that with the game's namesake being Colosseums. Essentially, several of these exist across the world, all of which bring the same end goal, offering you 4 double battles in a row to earn EXP and money, with repeat runs of the Colosseum even having fresh teams to boot, up to 4 rounds, potentially featuring TM rewards. As for the Colosseum specifics, there's 2. Being that Colosseum is the only one banning shadow Pokemon from use. Meanwhile, Tower Colosseum unfortunately does not work like the rest, as instead of having something unique in post-game, it just repeats the story's final gauntlet, not with enhanced teams. Overall, outside of fishing for the TM rewards or maybe EXP in late game, you're not getting too much use of the Colosseums, unfortunately, especially as our final feature unfortunately fills most of those gaps. Yeah, the EXP ones included being Mount Battle. This place serves as the game's battling endurance gauntlet of 100 battles in a row, and is radically different from your demo the main story trip provides. Basically, you're given stretches of 10 battles in a row with a break room after each 10, rewarding you with some Poke Coupons and a PC before you keep going against teams that get ever so harder, as seen in the level curve section. Of course, the quality gets better over time too. If you ever leave though, or win outright, you can actually skip past certain areas of choice you have beaten prior, allowing you to skip past repetitive content or jumping straight to Pokemon with relevant EXP yields or higher Poke Coupon rewards to make grinding significantly faster, where after a complete run from start to finish, you will have earned nearly 70% of a choice band in Poke Coupons. Cool! Unfortunately, due to the leveling related shenanigans, not to mention being healed after every battle, the difficulty in this area does leave a lot to be desired, especially in the post-game. But it's not all doom and gloom, as once battle mode rolls around, Mount Battle actually gets a massive redemption arc. But as for now, just take this iteration as an easy mode that rounds out the main game's lineup of side features. One near useless, one helpful if you remember it exists, one that you'd probably avoid entirely due to leveling complications during the main run, and finally, one that gets entirely outdone elsewhere. Cool! Finally time to pivot out of the main game. Yes, gamers, we're finally allowed to explore the other half of the main menu, to see battle mode. Although, before we can even think about battling, we're gonna have to get our Pokemon, as by default, you can't just run in and game for most of the modes. Here, you've got to use the Register Pokemon button to copy your party Pokemon from either your Colo save or your GBA games for battle until the process is repeated. Building said teams is easier said than done, due to Gen 3's team building already being a daunting task. But when that optimization is bending to Colo's game design of no wild Pokemon, multiple Pokemon on trainers teams, breeding not being a thing, and many TMs not being available, it's just impossible to optimize your team building. If you have any GBA games, please use those instead. You're even able to send the Poke Coupon rewards straight to those games, skipping Colo as a middleman entirely. Hell, Shadow Pokemon are banned in the mode too, so there's no reason not to use a GBA game actually. For the love of everything, just don't use Colo for this mode, I am begging you. But with this hurdle jumped over, we can actually use these teams across 3 different modes in fact. With Colosseum mode first, we're granted several Colosseum runs divided by level for you to run across in both doubles and singles format, kind of being like the Battle Tower of the mainline games. The differences that set the Colosseums apart would include each stadium having set in stone foes that'll be available each time you run that specific Colosseum, the fact there are actually 8 battles in a row rather than 7, and you get the ability to use continues on a loss. That last note being pretty important, as deathless battles will earn you extra continues. And because the game is soft, you actually start out with 5 of them for no reason, potentially trivializing your run. What makes these battles really obnoxious to partake in, however, is the same level requirement nonsense that ruined Ruby and Sapphire's Battle Tower. The issue of all foes battle being at the listed level 50 or 100 depending on what you choose. The issue here is how this essentially means the rule set serves as its own ban list. Meanwhile, your Pokemon must be at the selected level or lower because there's no scaling levels up or down, meaning the second your Pokemon crosses that level 50 line, it's incapable of running the previous Colosseums, only usable at the level 100 rule set where they'd be completely worthless, unless you decide to grind them all the way up, which there's not a shot in hell you'll do. And as a reminder, that level 50 ban list would likely include your main story mons, because you were using them throughout the main game, who not only would be impossible to replace without a GBA game, thanks to breeding not existing, then they'd be forced to partake in the much harder Colosseums they wouldn't even be properly built for. What, did you think the organization of this page was for the levels? No, it's for difficulty too. The weakest level 100 rule set has Groudons and Kyogres, powerful weather teams. Good luck. But assuming you have the infinite willpower to build teams properly on both the level 50 and level 100 rule sets, it's safe to say there's some battling fun and challenge you can find here, assuming you drag your feet feet through the snorefest that is half the level 50 runs. Colosseum mode doesn't tickle your fancy though. The redemption arc of Mount Battle absolutely should. Basically again, Mount Battle's 100 battle gauntlet upscaling challenge. This time with bans on in-battle items, the call button just being revoked entirely, you have no EXP gain, and you have a proper team selection screen rather than bringing all 6 of your Pokemon. What works overtime in making the battle mode version stand out is mostly the difficulty bump. Not only do challenging foes start appearing much sooner, but the main game's overly power leveled late game is infinitely surpassed as well. So for an example of what that quality bump would look like, instead of seeing junk like Ninetales, Blossom, Glalie, Crawdaunt, Gligar, and other low powered junk intended for the main game of Colosseum to conquer in the last 10 battles, battle mode's last 10 battles see wicked stuff like Metagross, Walrein, Salamence, the Laddie twins, the legendary cats, fully cooked weather teams, and other dangerous strategies, a random mythical among so much more that makes the later half of Mount Battle so much more thrilling. And the best part, gamers, that's just the doubles version. Singles actually sees entirely different teams and skills needed for its own run. That's 2 runs of Mount Battle to conquer. And the best part of it all, the level restrictions that get in the way of team building in Colosseum mode actually don't apply, since the foes will scale to your highest leveled Pokemon instead, dropping the bar for entry drastically. Pair that with all the continues you'll earn along the way, with the ability to take breaks when need be, you'll surely be able to brute force this challenge. Unfortunately, those are the only features that really matter here. Like, yeah man, let's do the battle now option, just being a junk quick play mode, granting you a random team to fight another team. That's literally it. There's no rewards for it, nor is the continue battling button worthwhile, since it just rematches the team you just battled. Meanwhile, Gang Battle only serves as a means to put 2 or 4 human players against each other, but on the big screen, typically being irrelevant outside of the GameCube's visual scene, unless you otherwise can't battle with just your 1 or 3 GBAs, since the GameCube itself can serve as another player. But gamers, that does it for Colosseum's main menu content lineup. It's just battling at a higher skill level than what the main game provides. That you're probably gonna want a GBA game for. Thankfully, we're at Colo's biggest W with the art direction. Starting with the music, it wouldn't be any stretch to call this one of the greatest soundtracks Pokemon has ever created. Top 3 at minimum. Solid overworld themes, packed with some of the best battle music ever printed. Leaves the game's soundtrack among the peaks of the series, no questions asked. As for the art direction, it's not nearly as strong, but still a win. The Pokemon models, while a lot of the Gen 1 and 2 mods can be and are recycled, are absolutely great, despite some of them looking like that. What, you think that's bad? No, that right there is what we call personality and a solid sense of art direction. Even then, add Gen 3 to the equation and those mons look beautiful. Overall, Pokemon models look nice and the animations they have are absolutely lovely, brimming with personality. God forbid we let the actual animations get involved, succeeding with how much more loose and over the top they are. Modern Pokemon could never. Plus, another win is just how the camera angles could be pretty odd as well, just being excessively zoomed in at times, just as another form of charm the game has, almost making you forgive the game for not letting you turn off battle animations in the first place. Yeah, that's something that you can't do. But who cares, man? The overworld areas, look how beautiful those are. Meanwhile, the character models are also pretty over the top, nowhere near the sanitized nonsense that we've felt for 2 decades now, despite being a little bit rough around the edges, at least for the generics. The bosses, though, they're just peak beyond belief. Like, you tell me if this looks more like a Pokemon character, or if it looks more like a Final Fantasy character. The fact it's a question at all should speak volumes. Also, hey, how about some controversy? The PC sprites are just the Pokemon models, which is something I forgot to tear BDSP to shreds over last time, for simply how ugly theirs were, right? Maybe it's just the visible shinies, the shadow status being visible, or even just the Pokemon's posing. These models of the Pokemon just look far more interesting, made much better when you actually look in the party where they become entirely different images. Simply put, gamers, the art direction is just an absolute bliss on all fronts. As far as the story goes, thankfully things take a turn from the standard Pokemon procedure. Unfortunately though, things are still pretty barren and uneventful. Beginning the adventure, you take control of a criminal with a track record, including destruction of property, potentially classifying as terrorism, many accounts of theft, and potentially assault with a deadly weapon. You end up freeing some random girl from being kidnapped, where through minute things happening will drag you into fighting Cypher, the game's main antagonist group seeking world domination. So your quest includes you shutting down a shadow Pokemon distribution ring in Pyrite Town, saving both a relic and a time flute so they can't dispose of Celebi, putting an end to their lab creating shadow Pokemon, and finally a showdown at Railgam Tower with the boss himself, where the boss is only truly stopped through the escape helicopter getting blown out of the sky by Ho-Oh, in an act that could have ended in more destruction than your own crimes have. Thanks, you stupid bird. You know, you could have killed people. He's just lucky it just knew the crashing trajectory. That's lovely. And as for the post game, it's the bare minimum. You're just going around snagging all the shadow Pokemon to tie up loose ends. And outside of some impersonation, there's not much here. Yeah, that's Colo's plot. There's no nonsense here. It's just go in and stomp some bad guys with no real distractions along the way, packed with a fun world made all shiny courtesy of its shadier than normal tone and all the thrilling dialogue that comes with. As for the characters, your partner sucks, basically has nothing interesting going on, outside of her simple ability to be left at a Colosseum gate just to magically teleport inside to spot a Shuckle. You know, if she had these kind of powers this entire time, then how couldn't she just free herself from being kidnapped? You know what, whatever. Cypher is handled well, despite their goals being extremely simple. Team Snag'em being used by them would probably be a good plot point if they didn't vanish for 90% of the game. And of course, your trainer that stops the bad guys is unfortunately a blank slate, but surely the sequel game will help him in some way, right? Yeah, good joke. Sadly, despite good pieces being on the board, it's an overly simple Pokemon plotline with a lot of nothing happening throughout. You kind of just forget there's even stuff happening in the game at times. And at the end, Pokémon Colosseum is one of the best, worst games out there. While that may be a very harsh way to say it, painting Colo as anything but a game with a great foundation, stricken with crippling troubles that make playing through it hard to stomach, would be very misleading. The game succeeds big time in terms of the art direction, the story's departure away from the norm, the general tone of the world, to even that of the game's lack of HMs in the overworld. The battling scenes focus on double battles, serving as the game's single best quality, where your lack of firepower, and the random leads lead to more organic difficulty, not to mention some of the finer battling options like battle modes Mount Battle in the later Colosseums. There is a lot to like, but as always, the bads really drop in like an avalanche, burying this game's hype. From simply running around the world, becoming a slog with bad speeds, paired with someone who's constantly trying to body block you, and a lack of fast travel, movement is bad. Playing through the game sucks through the massively limited supply of Pokemon that kills variety, paired with a level curve featuring unnecessary jumps that push already competent teams to extremes that knock you down to your knees in order to grind, which of course this game doesn't have the most effective methods to farm XP from. Not to mention the stupid level requirements in Battle Mode's Colosseum mode, and most egregiously, the changes to saving. Things just suck, man. This game was genuinely so close to greatness from just concept alone, but all these flaws just caused the game to be one of the biggest headaches to go back to, tarnishing such a promising title. It's a game you'll want to love, but it just won't stop fighting back. When we roll around to the reviews, things are pretty middle of the road, thanks to these high highs and whimpering lows. But this game lives a life of averages, where we'll see its score of 1 to 5, sitting at a 3. Because yeah, mechanically, the game is sound, and like Heart Gold Soul Silver, it actually plays well under a save editor to speed up all the grinding related downtime, where doing things the intended way on all fronts is a task that causes the game to fall like a house of cards. In terms of asking should you play the game, yeah, simply put, this game isn't just a 3D battling sanctuary like the Stadium games to an extent, or Battle Revolution. You got an entire main game campaign involved with its own plot, with battle that, thanks to being doubles only, plays very uniquely among the series. Yeah, this game's got something of substance for quite literally everyone. And as for a personal opinion on the game, it's tough. The game's aura is off the charts, and the gameplay goes hard, but hot damn is running the main story a nightmare at times that makes me dread even touching it, which could be fine on its own, but since XD is a game and is significantly better, the reasons to go back and play Colo, they're nowhere near as strong as they used to be, dude. Just play that instead, especially as it's got much more going on gameplay wise. But gamers, that just about does it today. Thank you for watching, and until next time! Egan, you asshole! Gamers, explain to me why this utter failure of a trainer, no, failure of Pixels, is gonna sit here and send the email to fetch the Master Ball just for us to talk to him, and he claimed to not even have sent anything! Dude, the notification was there. Did he forget or something? He sent it. It's in the mailbox. But sure, dude, whatever. I clicked the button, I read it, and now he magically remembers that he sent the email. So now you can have your item to spam to the high heavens because the infinite Pokeball glitch is so absurdly broken. We need more Egan slander. I'm glad this guy's Pikachu gets bodied by a brand new trainer in XD.